let's move on to some questions from the audience. I know there's a microphone being moved around. I think Miko over there has it. Okay, first come, first serve. Let's try and keep it balanced between men and women. Let's go over there first to that gentleman at the back. It's just there over on the right. Thank you, Miko.
Hi. I like your vision about talking against austerity. I just wonder, how can we also present a vision of pragmatic optimism? Where should the investment go? And particularly, I want to talk about a rising trend, Argentina, the US now, of talking about government efficiency. It sounds like someone going after government, but I think there is room for simplification in government, because it should not be a right idea that governments should be efficient. The taxpayer money should be used wisely. So why do we let the right take over what should be left-wing ideas? How can we also take over the narrative that I think appears to be getting stolen by the right, and instead of arguing against racists, but rather take over the narratives? We talk about government efficiency, we talk about positive investment in what? Where is our vision, and what do you suggest Europe should look to concretely?
Thank you. Shall we take another question and then we'll put it? Yeah. I think there's a lady over here. Can we go over there? And then we'll have more chance for more questions afterwards, and I'm sure Yanis will be happy to talk to you as well, and Bríd after we're done here.
Look, what happened to the left wings, to the progressive in Europe? Don't you see something that has to do with the co-optation of all politicians, left-wing politicians, progressive politicians, by the Davos group, by this group of who wants to reset the world, the Great Reset? Is there a connection with that?
Thank you. Okay, let's start with these two. If we have time for another couple after, we will do that. Who would like to? Bríd, Bríd. Yeah, let's start with the Bríd, indeed.
Yeah, well, these are very provocative questions in a way, but very essential. Maybe to deal with your question about like where to go from here, I think it's so important. The narrative is so important. I think one of the important things I would emphasize is we have to dismantle the narrative of the right. I mean, we have to interrogate it and dismantle it. I mean, for example, of course, as Yanis emphasized at the beginning, the fixation on what's happening in Palestine and the war around that. But actually the war that the right is raging is not just the physical armaments war, it's the war also on people. It's the dispensable people of the South, whether we're talking Sudan, we're talking DRC, but it's also the dispensable people of the North, and the absolutely marginalized people that are in zero jobs, zero contract jobs, be grateful for austerity, and the war on our public services. So I think we have to actually dismantle that narrative of the right. We also have to dismantle the myth of Europe as the as the frontliner on peace and democracy. Of course, we should never underestimate the struggle of the left in the war, in the Second World War. There was that great attempt, in a way, to create a new era for humanity. However, it got completely hijacked. I mean, what we're learning, I think, in our engagement with Palestine is that the Palestinian occupied settler colony was actually an invention of the US and Britain, and to make sure Palestine would never be a self-contained and sovereign state. I think what we have found in Europe after the Second World War was a kind of false consensus, in a way. And I think all the shifts we have seen of the left since World War II is exactly that we've gone away from the conditions that are necessary to deliver on the issue of peace, on the issue of justice, on the issue of equality. So I think one of our major challenges is how we reinvent the narrative, but also how we call out where the narrative has been, not only the narrative, but the reality has really been conceded. It has been conceded to the right. So I think we're in a very challenging moment, but we're also in a very opportune moment. If we don't do it now, when will we do it? And this is going to take all of us revisiting our politics, revisiting our alliance work, revisiting the Europe that we want, because of course the Europe that we have is our friends from, I remember one of our great friends from Africa in TNI, Dot Keys. I mean, Dot would say, you know, any of you in Europe, and she meant the left, do any of you in Europe understand how parasitical Europe is, how parasitical our economy, how false it was? It was built really not just on the labor of European workers, but it was built on the resources of the global south. And I think this is something we really have to, in a way, bring all our imaginations to. I believe the era we are entering is the era of political imaginary. And without that, we will not be able to call out the Mafrau genocides or the Menair genocides. We really have to reinvent that. And I think the fact that we have a full room here this morning, on a Saturday morning, it means, yeah, we are all part of revisiting that political imaginary. And there is no roadmap. Maybe that's what one of the major casualties of our political thinking. You know, neoliberalism is collapsing. But however, it has also, as you were emphasizing the question of efficiency, but actually we are being pushed back from taking a leap of an ambitious vision for the future. And that's where your point comes in very well. We have lost the discourse, in a way, of the left, which is to be imaginative, but also to work hard to organize it, which Yanis really acknowledged for your work here this morning. How many people here in the room worked for this morning, for bringing these people together? Hands up. How many people? Please, hands
high. Dutch team of the put your hands up.
No, well, I mean, this is it. I think this is the equation. If we don't have people who will do the block by block work, well, our vision will not be realized, or it will have a long time in gestation.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I sympathize with your concern that the right should not steal the thunder of the efficiency narrative, but at the same time, if you look at the last 40 years since Thatcherism and Reaganism and so on, efficiency has never suffered more than by those who claim to serve it. Thatcher was all about whittling down the state, what Elon Musk has been tasked to do now. The narrative was we cut, and at the same time, if you ask them, all right, so who's going to do the work, transfer all the state bureaucratic machinations, work to the private sector, which by definition, by assumption, is more efficient because of competition. Bullshit. Just, sorry, I mean, I can't find a more scientific term to describe it. The result of Thatcherism is that Britain has not built one reservoir in the last 38 years. They cannot build a fast train from London to Manchester, and they spent tens of billions, and now they had to cut it down to go from London to Birmingham. Why is that? Because these large-scale projects require, especially if they're going to be funded by the taxpayers, which is the only way they can be made, because the private sector, look, Elon Musk may be going now to the moon and to Mars and so on, but he would never have put forward, no private company would ever have done the hard work that NASA did for many, many years to go to the moon, right? So, by essentially creating an atrophy in the bureaucracy of the great liberal democratic states, they have stopped them from being able to do anything. The United States, there is no way, let's say that Trump, wants to build a super fast train from New York to LA. Let's be less ambitious. From New York to Washington. He can't do it because there is no company in the United States that is capable of doing it. They want to build nuclear submarines and they can't. They have all the money, they have economized, they have borrowed, and they put all the money there, but their shipyards cannot produce it. Why? Because they have lost the capacity. This efficiency narrative has depleted their capacity to produce anything. Compare and contrast with China, where there's a vast bureaucracy, and yet they can make things happen profitably, right? And efficiently. So let's not grant them that. Of course, we need, as leftists, to attack not so much inefficiency, but corruption. This is what state bureaucracies are replete with, and this is what we need. And their corruption is always the kind of activity that these libertarians never touch on, because they love it. So when, for instance, I mentioned before in my previous chat with you, when they printed 3 trillion euros in order to boost the European economy, how efficiently was that utilized? They gave it to the bankers who gave it to their friends in big business to buy shares, to increase the share price so that their bonuses would go through the roof, because the bonuses of the directors are linked to the share price. Now, if this is not a mind-boggling level of inefficiency, I would call it just straightforward corruption. I don't know what is. Now, you mentioned the Great Reset. Forget it. It's insignificant. It's just entirely with no substance. The point you started making was a good one, about the left, the center-left politicians being co-opted by big business. That is utterly correct. They don't need Davos and they don't need the Great Reset. The Great Reset is just a little project to keep some people busy and being talked about. There's no conspiracy here. Or to put it differently, there is a conspiracy without conspirators. It's called capitalism. I call it techno-feudalism. But let me give you an example from my personal experience. As you may know, you do know, for about 5.5 months I was the Minister of Finance in Greece. And my task was to clash with the neoliberal libertarian, supposedly, they were not new, they were not liberal, they didn't believe in freedom. They simply wanted to push austerity down our throats and to appropriate as much wealth for their mates or for their bosses, to be more precise. In my team, I had some very smart, young men and women who had grown up through meetings like this, through the movements. They were part of the coalition of the radical left of Greece, our party, Syriza back then. They had good education, master's degrees and PhDs. They had a good Marxist upbringing in terms of their theory. And I remember, I'll mention one of them, not by name. Let's call him Costa. His name is not Costa, but let's call him Costa. Right? He was the person who was, in my team, the most radical. And my greatest moral supporter in those meetings, when I would come out and my heart had sunk by what I had heard, he would be lifting my spirits and no pasaran, and as long as the people are behind us. One of the things we were working on with him was the electricity, power generation and distribution network. The Troika wanted, what happened in the end after my resignation, that our publicly owned electricity grid, production and distribution, to be cut down and cut up in different pieces to be given to oligarchs. Okay? We gave this fight, we lost, I went home. And for a while I have to say that I was so depressed that we started DiEM25 and so on, but I lost touch with many of the comrades from Syriza because Syriza stayed in government and did all that. 6 months ago, I was walking my dog outside the house, and there comes a sparkling 600 EDFC Mercedes-Benz that took about 3 acres to park in the middle of congested Athens. And then comes out this young man, this young Costa. I hardly recognized him. His Armani suit was sparkling in the dark. His beard had gone. He looked suave, okay? And he was actually nice to me. He said I looked like something the cat dragged in, not my dog, because I was taking the dog for a walk. I was dirty, and it was midnight. And he said, "Yanis." I said, "Costa." And he nearly hugged me, but didn't. And he said, "Oh, I've been following you. As always, I'm always very impressed by what you're doing." And I said, "Costa, what are you doing these days?" He said, "I'm the CEO of one of these private companies that inherited a chunk of our public electricity grid." And I didn't say anything to him because he knew enough to know what a bastard he was. So I didn't need to tell him anything. I just smiled. I said, "Well, good luck with what you're doing." He said, "Yanis, look, I'm still learning a lot from you," he said. "But Yanis, are you still insisting on this left-wing thing?" I said, "Some of us are too old to change our spots." And I walked away into the dark. So it's not the Gates, he said, it's not Bill Gates, it's capital.
Of DM25 in the Netherlands, Lucille, take it away.
Thank you, Davide, and so honored to be part of such an amazing event today. We pulled it off in literally 2.5 days, and I'm so excited to see you all here. So, well done for responding so quickly. And that's what we require in order to shift power. We require a swift and quick response. Always. You need to move as soon as you understand that things are being pulled out of your hands. You need to fight back, and you need to do it quickly. We need to move out of the lull that we are under. It's almost like we're under the spell of capital, but we need to move out of that. And so I was very inspired when Jeremy spoke about the poets earlier on, and I just penned something really quickly. I'm going to read it out to you. They will never destroy the brilliance of our resilience, the fire in our desire, the voice in our choice, the persistence in our resistance. They can shove us, push us, shame us, and come after us, but they will never silence us. Whilst we organize for power, we must organize for peace. And that's where I believe we need to move, and move swiftly. And from the Dutch perspective, I think that we have been too fragmented for far too long, and it's time to join together, like I said last week in Museumplein, unite in the fight. That's what we need to do. It doesn't matter your politics, it doesn't matter how far left you lean, but if you are someone that cares, you gotta get out of where you are, your comfort zone, and get involved in whichever way you want. But later on, we're going to talk about how you can do that from the Dutch perspective. And over to Davide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucille. Indeed, we'll talk about the Dutch perspective, but let's begin with the pan-European internationalist one, and then boil it down to what we can do actually here in the Netherlands. But maybe the Irish perspective next, from Bríd. What lessons can you give or pass on, or what lessons have we learned from the experience of Ireland that can be adapted also to Europe and to what we're doing here today, also in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I don't know, but that's a Pandora's box, or at least a chip in the light forward. Well, I think one of the major sort of, one of the major perhaps lessons or reflections really on the Irish experience is the following, and it links very well with what Yanis was saying earlier today. We've had this amazing relationship with Europe. I mean, if you're looking close enough in many of the cities of Europe, you'll find remnants of an earlier Irish missionary effort from Europe in the 6th century. No? We've always, well, first of all, we came, I think, from the Middle East. We claim as Celtic people to come from the Mesopotamia. I guess the Mesopotamia has many children, many tribes. Well, the Celts claim that's one of our tributaries. That's a place we came from. We were pushed by the Romans across Europe. And then in the 6th century, we revisited Europe. And then fast forward to the more recent century. In the meantime, we developed these incredibly sort of imperialistic, encountered this imperialistic design of Britain in relation to Ireland, which we still have. I mean, Northern Ireland is still occupied, in case you didn't know. And in the meantime, I think the important, we've many important lessons from our own revolution, because there was, naturally, in many contexts of a national struggle, the national part is very well articulated. In the Irish case, we also had a socialist part. As a matter of fact, we claim the first Red Army in Europe was in Dublin, not in Petersburg. In 1913, the workers of Dublin organised what we call the Citizens' Army. And these two strands have run through our history until now. And in a way, I think the very positive thing about Ireland today and about the popular struggle there is that we are trying to reclaim these two strands in the question of self-determination, but the question of another Ireland, not one that's in hog to the European Union, whether we are talking about the common agricultural policy, whether we are talking about being the jump-off point for American corporations to Europe, or whether we are talking about, which is going to be our major battle, the question of NATO. Ireland with Austria is one of the few countries that's not in NATO, and we have resisted that ever since NATO was established and before. In our own revolution in the beginning of the 1900s was born from the anti-conscription movement against the First World War. We're now at a situation, and this you will hear more about this from Irish activists. We have what we call we have rejected all the, despite we being big fans of Europe and Europe's people, we've rejected all the major consolidation treaties of the European Union, including Lisbon, which was a very, very big fight. And many of those fights have really zeroed in on the military question, in a way, the question of capitalism in Europe, imperialism remanifesting in Europe, but also military manifestation. And we have a triple lock, which was a kind of concession in the period of the Lisbon Treaty, that because we voted no, and then we were deluged, of course, with money and everything else from the European Union, and sort of, being regarded as very, very backward members of the European Union, like the Greeks, no? Or the Portuguese, or the Spaniards. But in the kind of concession that was made and built was what we call the triple lock, that this keeps us out of NATO, basically. And right now, our current coalition are on a slippery slope. They're under tremendous pressure, no doubt, from Washington, but also from Europe. I mean, the dream, the dream of Europe is all of the European Union inside NATO. And we believe this is going to be a very pitched battle. Maybe I will come back to that maybe when we pick up other strands of battles we have to fight here in Europe. But we will certainly need the support of the rethinking people of Europe to win this battle and refuse to be in NATO. The other country, by the way, that's not in NATO is Austria. Why? That was negotiated by the Soviet Union with the victors of Second World War to allow that they would withdraw from Austria if Austria will remain neutral. Yeah, a very, very important point that, of course, we very conveniently forget in the big narrative of today. Yeah.
Thank you, Bríd. On that note, Yanis.
Well, thank you. 1, 2, yes, we're back. It is not just a question of keeping Ireland out of NATO. This is an important task. It is bigger than that. The question ought to be, how do we get Europe out of NATO? The whole of Europe out of NATO. And the reason I say that is because, there are many reasons. One is that I grew up in a fascist dictatorship that was a member of NATO. So when Finnish and Polish and Estonian comrades say to me, but Yanis, NATO is a liberation movement, I say, no, it wasn't when I was growing up. Beyond that, the standard narrative is that NATO is a protective shield which keeps us safe from the Russians, the Chinese, extraterrestrials. This is the idea. The idea is that there are enemies out there intent on taking us over, and NATO is a shield defending us. But this is one narrative. But the narrative that I espouse is exactly the opposite. That NATO is like the mafia. The mafia sows insecurity in you, busts your shop down, up, in the middle of the night, and then comes and sells you protection. So this is, allow me to make the point regarding Ukraine. There's no doubt that Putin, I have personally demonstrated with Jeremy, outside the Russian embassy. Do you know when? You don't know. 2001, over the massacres of Chechens by Putin, who killed 250,000 people, so as to consolidate his presidency, his regime in Moscow. Back then, he was the blue-eyed boy of NATO. They loved him. So much so that he proposed, that Russia joins NATO. And we were being beaten up by policemen, coppers in London for demonstrating outside the Russian embassy. So I stood up in the Senate of the University of Athens, where I'm a professor and I was back then, when the Greek right-wing government of the time was pushing down our throats, as professors, their demand that we give Putin an honorary doctorate. I stood up, and I was in a minority of one again, saying no, because he's a war criminal. So, just for the record, right? But who created Putin? The Americans. It is very clear. Think 1991. The Soviet Union has collapsed. The Russian economy is gone, right? On the floor, face down. You have that idiot Chubais, the prime minister, under Yeltsin, essentially a Thatcherite, wanting to introduce privatization. He did. Privatize everything and effectively make Russia into an extension of Thatcher-Reagan. And he was begging the Americans to let him do it. The Americans said, no, we need an enemy. So they sent the IMF in, and the IMF was sent in there with one currently friend of mine, a gentleman whom you may have heard of, Jeff Sachs. Have you followed his brilliant videos and interventions on Palestine and the war in Ukraine? That's now. It's like the New Testament and the Old Testament. The Old Testament, Jeff Sachs, was a man of the United States and the IMF, and they crushed the Russian economy on purpose. And how did they do it? In the usual way of imposing incredibly harsh austerity on purpose. They demanded unpayable debts to be repaid, they put up taxes, and the result was a very interesting statistic, many of you may know it. Life expectancy of Russian men, which was in 1991 78 years of age, which is comparable to the West, it fell down to 56. That doesn't happen even during a very severe war. So Russia was crushed by the United States, by the IMF, by the West. The result was a new authoritarian bloke, quasi-fascist, called Vladimir Putin. So you have NATO creating the United States creating the circumstances for the insecurity amongst us here in Europe, so that we feel that we need NATO. Yeah. And I always suspected that. But in 2011, I moved from Greece to the United States. And I went to the great state of Texas, where I lived and worked in Austin at the University of Texas. And I was very privileged back then. The best part of my academic career, because it was a very wealthy department, the Lyndon Johnson School of Public Affairs. Graduate students, imagine, I had only 50 students, not me. The whole school had 50 students. And no chores whatsoever. It was just fantastic academic life for me. And our students were all trained to be diplomats, NGO people, USAID, United Nations, or CIA. And the dean of my school was a former general of the American Army, who was actually the chief of staff of NATO before he got this position. After he retired, he got this position of being dean in my school. His name was Bob, very nice guy. He was appointed by George W. Bush, so not some commie, right? And I remember having dinner with Bob and other people. And this is 2011. I said, Bob, having been the chief of staff of NATO in Brussels, why do we need NATO? He said, well, you don't need it, we do. I said, in this very convivial Texan straightforwardness, right? And he said, so why do you need? Okay, I agree, we don't need it, and you do, but why do you need NATO? He said, for 3 reasons, Yanis. I said, what? To keep the Germans down, number one, to keep the Russians out, and to keep ourselves in. That's why we need to get out of NATO. Because of what the former chief of staff, former general of the US Army told me. And which is evident. But how do we get there? There are necessary conditions that are not sufficient, and there are necessary conditions which can be made sufficient. A necessary condition is activism, is what we do. But it is not sufficient. Because you cannot allow these people in The Hague, in Brussels, in Washington, in London, in Dublin, to run around making decisions on our behalf, without simply doing activism outside the gates. Now, there is no doubt that the transition from a movement to an electoral vehicle, call it a party, whatever, coalition that runs in elections, is a difficult one. It is one fraught with danger. Because the moment good people, I mentioned Costa before, the moment good people approach the corridors of power, they have a tendency to morph into bad people. That's why whatever we create in the form of a political party or an electoral vehicle has to be genuinely democratic, and there must be checks and balances. Anyone who wants to be a member of parliament, a government minister, or a prime minister should be ruled out immediately. Immediately. You must only be allowed to do it if you consider it to be a chore. Only if you consider it to be a chore. Now, this is easier said than done, but you see, there is no alternative than taking that step. And this is how I end. When we created the M25, I just come out of government, and I have to tell you that the moment I resigned from the ministry, that was, in a way, one of the happiest moments of my life. because I no longer had to be a minister. It was awful being in those meetings and, you know, having people lick my boots just because I was a stupid minister. You know, it really distorts the morality of people to be next to somebody who's minister. I can assure you that. It is terrible. At the same time, I was extremely depressed because we suffered a major political, the movement suffered a major political defeat. So when we started DiEM25, and we had the press conference in Berlin and so on, we were asked, is this a party? And we said, no, it's a movement. It's a movement that tries to bring together many movements along the lines of activism. You don't need me to explain it. And what we did for 2 years was to bring together parties like Podemos in Spain, Die Linke in Germany, various organizations here in Holland, the Communist Party of France, La France Insoumise, Mélenchon's party. We brought everybody, you know, Jeremy, everyone together to come up with a plan, to have an answer to the question, okay, if you don't like how Europe is being run, how would you run it? And that plan took a name, had a name in the end, the Green New Deal for Europe, with which we were hoping that all these parties, including the Greens, would run in the European Parliament elections of 2019. And we had 1,000 experts from these different groups contributing to our program. It was a very hopeful period until 7 months before the elections. We realized that none of these parties will run with this thing that we created together. Not because they disagreed with us, but because within their parties there were disagreements and they couldn't all coalesce around the thing that they contributed to. So in the end, in order to avert severe depression in our own hearts, we had created a nice document, 150 pages or so, a genuine answer to the question of what should happen in 2019 across Europe, in terms of investment, in terms of public goods, in terms of socializing money, of ending the monopoly that the central bank has over the bankers and the bankers over the central bank, green investment, that's a green part of the Green New Deal. So it was actually a great document. But if nobody was prepared to run in the elections with it, it would end up being on a shelf, on a bookshelf, as if we were a think tank, totally ignored by the world. So we decided to run. And that's when we created Mera, which is a Greek word for deer, for day, right? And we ran in Greece, we ran in Germany, we ran in Portugal with some of our comrades there, in Spain. In the end, we ended up gathering something like 1.5 million votes across Europe, which is not a lot, but we had a budget of 60,000 euros across Europe. In municipal elections, the budget is greater than that. And we have not succeeded, but it doesn't matter. Simply by running in elections, we're running now in the elections in the Federal Republic of Germany. Okay, there's no chance we'll be elected. No chance, zero chance, but it doesn't matter. Running in these elections gives us the opportunity, when everybody's talking about politics during the election campaign, to go out there and leaflet and talk to people and to explain to them why you want their vote and make it known that there is an alternative. So this is far away from succeeding, but everything is far away from succeeding. What matters is taking the right step today along the same direction. Because Europe is incapable of being lucky. There is no way that there can be a helpful wind blowing into your sails if you're going in the wrong direction.
Thank you so much, Yanis, for that. Thank you. Yes, I remember those meetings very well, all across Europe, very arduous meetings, coming up together with the Green New Deal for Europe and deciding on, all the details. That was quite intense. Regarding Germany, indeed, I think it's on the 23rd of February, if I'm not mistaken, our German party, Meta25, is running in 3 states, North Rhine-Westphalia, Bremen and Berlin. And whilst our chances are slim, like Yanis mentioned, there is a little bit of hope there that things can be different. And what I know about the Netherlands, I know quite a few things about this country, but one of them is that the threshold here is quite low. Lucy, you want to talk about that?
Thank you. Yes, so Personally, I've only been in the Netherlands for 3 years, and things have escalated so rapidly in 3 years. I mean, think about your life in 2021, think of your life in 2022, and now think of your life in 2025. There has been a massive shift in just where people are in their minds, the kind of narratives we are getting thrown in our faces. So in my opinion, humble opinion, I come from South Africa, by the way. Let me give some context. So I come from South Africa, and I was sharing with Bríd earlier on, I was born in 1976, which is the year that the revolution truly began. And it began because in 1976 in South Africa, the then apartheid government was forcing students to be taught in the language of the oppressor, which is Afrikaans. And the students obviously protested against that, because how can you receive instruction in a language that you do not understand, right? Nelson Mandela spoke about that later on in his life when he said, if you want to communicate with something and get something into their head, you speak in your language, but if you want to get it into their heart, you speak in their language. And so students began to protest, and the police murdered 200 students that were protesting. And that is the true birth of the revolution, because previous to that, there were a lot of very educated people. I would say the left was all the educated university graduates. And what started to happen is the people began to go underground. Students left school to become part of the revolution. That is how we ended up with the Jacob Zuma. He was 14 years old, I think, when he joined the revolution. They all left school and they went underground. And what I'm trying to say is that when you see the crushing power of the oppressor being released in every single sphere of society, it's a moment of trying to get awake. You need to be more awake now than you've ever been in your entire life. This is the moment. And I was thinking about something that someone said to me earlier on when I was listening to Bríd standing on that side, and I want to share it with you. If not now, when? If not you, who? The only way we can begin to shift things out of the hands of the 1%, and let me tell you, they're not just the oligarchy. They are present in positions of power and authority. They may not have money. We have a very famous one here who is now in NATO, may not be exceptionally wealthy, but a person of extreme power and influence. This also constitutes the 1%. How do you and I, the ordinary people, take on this bully, this giant that has been shoving us further and further down that sinkhole? If you speak to most people, they're on the precariat. They're one paycheck away from being homeless. If right now your landlord or whatever the housing system that keeps your house has to fail, how close are you to being homeless? This is an important question for us. Most of us don't have tens of thousands in the bank account that can save us in time of crisis. And this is not just our position, this is the position of millions of people across Europe. They're all going through the similar kind of austerity that we are all facing. Whilst somebody mentioned earlier on that the right is beginning to pretend like they care about good governance. But if you truly just lift up the carpet, you will see all the corruption and filth that's hidden there. They've been doing it for years and years and years, and we have been their victims. So how do you wake up from the state of victimhood? You have to do it. Unfortunately, right now, the only power we have is parliamentary power. Because we can, you know that I'm on the streets, right? We're on the streets. We have activity going on all the time. We are activists. We are speaking truth to power. We are raising our voices, raising our flags. Thousands of us, we march in the streets. We are thousands, we are millions, we are all Palestinians. We're dealing with the struggle that people across other lands are experiencing. But it can't only stay in a place of activism. That is, I would say, sadly, a bit impotent in dealing with the struggles and with the powers that be. We need to play them at their own game. And how we do that is by choosing good people. I love what Yanis said. People that don't desire this position are the best people. We need people who actually care about society to be in positions of leadership. And how do they get there? Through us. So we need to unite in the fight. Whatever organization you belong to, we need to come together and say, what is the solution about how we're going to move from point A to point B? And you mentioned that it's much easier here in the Netherlands. I think it's like 5,000 signatures to start something in your gemeente, right? And I want to say we have started a working group here in the Netherlands. We are planning to launch Mira 25 at some point in the year. And we have a working group. Friso, can you just wave your hand? Friso. Okay. If you are interested in becoming part of this working group, let's talk. Because it's ordinary people in South Africa that shifted the power out of the hands of the few into the hands of the many. It was school children. It was people, housemaids, people that worked as domestic workers. It was the men that cleaned people's gardens. They shifted the power. You and I are not powerless. We are not powerless. They want us to think that we are, but we are not. We have power in the fact that we can change what is happening at those government levels. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And I said to someone the other day, I have zero respect for people that only talk but don't do the work. So I'm talking to us today. If we're willing to do the work, let's talk and let's shift things out of the hands of the few into the hands of the many.
Thank you for that very rousing speech. Thanks so much, Lucille. Bríd, could I just ask you to respond to some of the things you've heard here from Yanis and Lucille?
Yeah, it would be also great to know more maybe how the audience is thinking back there. Where to start on that? I guess from my own experience, maybe I come more with the tradition of building the movement rather than building the party. But that's not to say that the party doesn't have to be built. I think especially at this time, and maybe I sort of overstep myself if I have some comments about the Dutch movement. As we are speaking, I am thinking of two, what to me are now, well, maybe there are three major movements of people. One is what we've seen in Gaza over, I think the most significant thing in January in relation to Palestine is, my God, those people who've taken to the road to walk back through Gaza to their homes. I mean, I think we cannot fully draw the lessons from that, because what you'll also notice, those people, whether they were walking or in donkey cars or in motor cars, were organized. They were organized. This was not a free-for-all, jump and get back and take your place. I really do think we have immense lessons to draw from that. And of course it has historical resonance. We think of the Great March on China. We think of the great march of people who lined up to vote in South Africa. But also, I am thinking, one of my first experiences here in the Netherlands was the mobilization in Amsterdam on the Pershing missiles. Everyone who was able to walk and those who weren't able to walk, kids in prams, I mean, Amsterdam was occupied on that day against the Pershing missiles. And so was Bonn about a month later, also when Reagan came there. So it's not like it's not like people know what to do with it. But maybe the other image that's for me in relation to the movement is maybe we should have a much deeper discussion about the why. Why have we come to this point? But maybe we've grown too fond of our club mentality when it comes to movement. We have our favorite issues. In a way, globalization gave us permission to be passionate about the environment, but forget capitalism. Don't mention it. It gave us, we got false permissions. We can be organized on the rights of animals, but we cannot organize on the rights of migrants. Forget it. Migrants and refugees. That's the other major movement in the world that we have to take into account. And I think it's also very relevant here in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam. And I'm so delighted that Lucille is taking her place and her power in this effort to build DM. But I think, it tells its own story. For the years I've been working here, and there are some people in the room also, we have worked, in the forefront, not just of migrant and refugee rights, but of workers' rights, have been the Moroccan workers, the Turkish workers. They are extremely occupied at the moment about what's going on in the Netherlands. They are organizing also their gatherings. They are trying to see what are the connections with the home front, where the fight has to go on as well, and where North Africa can refuse simply to be the mercenaries of Europe at this point in time when it comes to migrants and refugees. So I think, what I'm kind of calling out is maybe there's and it shouldn't be to delay us, because I think if the marching in Gaza has taught us anything, it's the absolute urgency. At the same time, we need to be reflective. We need to know and ask ourselves why we are comfortable in our struggles in small groups. And I do think this is really a problem.
Yes.
Because we should make 1,000 flowers bloom, of course, but we should maybe take the lesson of the Zapatistas and build movements that have multiple movements inside. I think this is our biggest chance at the moment, to find the way to make. These convergences are not easy. They'll be full of tension, they'll be full of battles, they'll be full of discomfort. This is the great word at the moment in 21st century Europe. Am I safe? Am I comfortable?
Yeah.
No, we will not make the politics of the future by being comfortable. So what am I saying? What am I trying to say? Well, one thing I will say, I'll go back to Yanis's first words this morning about being fixated on Palestine. One thing I will say about the Irish body politic at the moment, of course, we don't forget that we had our Bloody Sunday. We had the anniversary just a few days ago, when the people who walked for civil rights in Northern Ireland were, just gone down by the SAS. And has anybody ever been held accountable? Not at all. Forget about accountability. No, but I think the question of, we have a fixation about Palestine, and I think it's a very healthy fixation. Many fixations we want to, we maybe should get rid of. But the fixation on Palestine is so important, also for the reasons that Yanis said, that it teaches us about ourselves. Whatever it teaches us about the Palestinians, it teaches us about ourselves. It teaches about, the machinery, the infrastructure, the system, the multilateral system that we are part of, and there are some important things about it, but that system has served really Europe and US's interests economically and otherwise. And I think these are the kind of, deep dive, deep seek discussion that we really need to have. This is the other thing. Some language we're not allowed to use. We're not allowed to use. The C words are particularly bad. Maybe the P words are very bad, but the C words, communism, there's another one. Capitalism, of course, and Chinese. Oh my God, don't go there. Don't go there. Nothing to be learned there. Europe, as as an entity, declared China as a strategic enemy. I mean, so when we dealt with the Russians, let's get on to the Chinese. I mean, the kind of unsupported, unintelligent comments that we are swallowing as the narrative of the dominant, we really have to kind of go back, really take a deep dive, a deep seek, I think, and try to make, like, I loved your question, actually, Yanis, about it's not enough to keep Ireland out of NATO. I agree completely. But like, by posing the question, how would a universal declaration for the rights of all peoples in the Netherlands, how would that look if we had a National Assembly or some such initiative to write a new declaration for the people of the Netherlands, by the people of the Netherlands, the transnational people of the Netherlands, not simply the white supremacist people of the Netherlands?